I'm Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, South Africa's official parliamentary opposition, and the party which runs the Western Cape Province and several other cities in South Africa. I've come to the Ukraine to see for myself for 6 days to assess the prospects for peace and understand the stakes Africa has in this regard. This is a war because we must call it a war, measured in the costs and successes and failures of military battle. For the military battle will determine the outcome in the short term. But the real cost of war is in human terms.
Well, we're here on the Ukraine-Poland border, just on the Poland side in a little town called Majika, where a large refugee camp has been set up here to try and get the people who have been displaced from the invasion of their country by the Russian government and the war that has pushed them from their homes. There are over 10 million Ukrainians who've been displaced. 5 million have had to be forced to leave the country. 2.5 million are here in Poland. And this is the human side of the conflict. This is the human cost of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this is 10 million reasons why we've got to end this conflict. Russia has to be pushed back by the international community, and it's not a situation that any country in the world can simply be agnostic about. We need to speak up and speak out against the human cost of this crisis here in Ukraine, caused by the Russians' invasion.
To this cost has to be added that of rebuilding the country, estimated already after just 2 months of fighting to be around $100 billion. It's also a war being waged against civilian targets, as you can see behind me at Bariacha. But this is not a cost that's confined to the Ukraine alone. It impacts on Africa in at least 4 ways. Firstly, fuel, the cost of which has risen at the pumps since Russia invaded Ukraine. This is also going to dramatically increase the costs of trade. Fertilizer cost increases will also reflect in the costs of food. Those prices increase, it's going to mean farmers have to pay more to be able to fertilize their crops. Thirdly, food costs. Given that Ukraine is the #1 sunflower, #3 corn, and one of the top 5 wheat producers worldwide, the war is not going to only affect its own income, but food security. Russia and Ukraine account for nearly 1/3 of the world's global wheat and barley exports. Now, this will have a particularly negative impact on some countries, especially Ethiopia, which is fighting a conflict of its own and which relies on the Ukraine for 36% of its wheat. Every 3rd piece of bread made in Africa and the Middle East is made from Ukrainian wheat. The restrictions to trading Ukrainian grains and oils through its ports has led to considerable price increases already, and these are only going to go up as the conflict escalates. And this is a war about another F, that of freedom, of choice, of rights, and of democracy. It's also freedom from empire, of choosing not to live under subjugation as part of a Russian empire. To the last point about freedom, to make peace in Ukraine, we have to at the outset be clear that this war is caused by a Russian invasion. As Vitaly Klitschko, the former world heavyweight boxing champ and now mayor of Kiev since 2014, has put it,
we actually fighting right now to defend not just our houses, our families, and our children. We defend values and principles.
Further war seems inevitable, absent overwhelming pressure for peace and upholding this moral imperative. Peace is not going to happen by itself. It'll have to be the result of a great deal of hard work and painful sacrifice. 3 conditions stand out. 1, there is a need to raise the pressure for a full Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainians have to play their military part, but our role is to place political pressure on Russia to do so. That's the very least we would expect if someone invaded our territory. 2, to address the rising costs of food, we should press very hard for the opening of the port of Odessa to international trade. Poor people the world over, and especially in Africa, are being held hostage to Russia's blockade of Ukraine's ports of export. This action could also help to build the confidence for a ceasefire and a peace deal. Thirdly, to increase the pressure for peace and establish the necessary external conditions, Africa should adopt a currency of humanitarian solidarity. One way to do so is to deliver humanitarian support. Another is to be advocates for peace through our parliaments. For instance, when I get back, I'm going to work for a visit of an all-Africa parliamentary group to Ukraine. The legendary South African parliamentarian Helen Suzman often offered this advice to others. Go and see for yourself. Don't take what the press tells you, don't take what other people tell you. Go and see for yourself. And this has been the purpose of my visit. I've been bowled over by the bravery and sense of purpose of the Ukrainians I've met. They all have the same message. We are defending our land. If you don't do so now, it may not exist in the future. Ukraine is today on the frontier of freedom and fighting the last frontier of empire. I'm standing at the site in Bucha, where more than 80 civilians were buried, innocent victims of this conflict. Ukraine is a nation fighting for a clear and just cause. African democrats should support them and find an end to this war, not only because it's in our interest to do so, but because it is the right thing to do.